Hello. Checking the levels, making sure everything looks good before I get going. Well, if that's a sign of things to come, then we're in trouble. You know, I never know what's going to come out. I really don't. I am but a vessel, and hopefully we fill ourselves with the finest of juices, okay? These alluring elixirs, these potent potions of delicious insight that sometimes can be found when poring over the historic American Building Survey. Now, I had to go through the comments and try to figure out what was the earliest request for the next state, and honestly, it was kind of inconclusive because I never made it all the way through. But as far as I can tell, there were requests made for a couple places pretty much around the same time frame. So what I'm going to do, rather than just do one state all the way to its completion, do several concurrently, so I can be as fair as possible. So spare me your accusations of playing favorites, which I've never received, and probably wouldn't, but still. Let me, preemptively... Okay. We are in Connecticut, or Corrupticut, so we're gonna linger around New England for a bit, and see what we can see on these preliminary inventories that have since been added to, but not very frequently. You know you're a real freaking dork when you can spot the differences between the applications for national registered place inclusion that are done by government officials and by the one done by college students. And yeah, I guess I can tell the difference, so my point is, I guess I'm a dork. The way I sort them always puts the drawings usually kind of first. It's almost like a teaser of things to come. And we see we've got some things here that are of interest already. Conjectured sketch of original house. That does not inspire confidence that what we're looking at is indeed historic, does it? And this is probably the first full-length thing I've posted since my return from my travels from coast to coast. Well, but from New York to California and back. Not that I live in either of those places, but still, that's where I was. Family obligations and such. And here included is a diagram of the inner workings of the male genitalia. Sorry, I didn't know how that got in there. You know, I couldn't let that slide without a joke. Always go for the joke. That is the motto. What I saw in those two states is that no matter where you go, it's the same. And I'll post those pictures, real live actual pictures I took at some point. I want to stop here and point out that part of this basement plan is unexcavated. Now why? Partially excavated and unexcavated. Now what does that even mean? Because I always thought excavation was, when you're revealing something from the earth, digging something up, right? I know they excavate foundations before they build on them, right? But why would this be unexcavated and yet still drawn? You see what I'm saying? You picking up what I'm putting down? There's article number 1 for evidence. Jimmy, how are the levels? Jimmy's back too, so that's good. There you go. That's what I'm talking about. Give me the arrows, Jim. You know I love them. No intro song this time, bud. I wasn't feeling it. Sometimes you feel it. Sometimes you don't feel it. I've explained this process multiple times, but for those who may be joining us for the first time, all 2 of you, there's something different. In a way, these are live stream without the live part. In other words, I sort the files unlooked at, I begin meandering through them and talking about them, and then later on I visually look at the audio file and I cut out the silences, which gives the appearance of sharp editing. But really, it's laziness. And then I oftentimes go back over it and add little sound, things like that, for comedy. So this is pretty much real-time reactions to some of this stuff. So sometimes knee-jerk, I pop off at something and I get it wrong, or I'm just looking at it completely wrong, or I miss stuff. And so that's what you guys are for. That's how the symbiotic relationship works. You point out what's wrong and stupid when I mess up and make something good. And that way we all learn and grow together, because we're a team, right? I like to think so. This one looks rather squat and top-heavy, doesn't it? Wondering what's going on in this little hill situation. We know this house got split in the divorce. Not evenly, but... And hopefully that's the last terrible joke I make. But... if history can tell us anything, it's that it's not the last. There's some foundational silliness that you wouldn't do unless you were wrong with that. And all these houses have appeared to me ever since I was a child, really. I used to think about it. They always looked like they were like a stone house with a sheath put over it. A house put on top of it, this concrete sort of base. I'm saying I was a child! Get off my butt. Same kind of churches it looks like, and a lot of the same sort of thing that New England seems to do where they name every house after somebody who lived there or lives there. Concrete floor not accessible. Staircase not originable. Originable. Well, I wonder why it's not accessible. Don't go down there. There's no bodies or anything. It's just, it's not very comfortable. The recliners are all worn out. Feeling a little feisty. Anyways, how you guys been? No matter where you go, these Capitol buildings, they just blow your mind. A lot of stuff on my mind, a lot of stuff coming up. This isn't my job or anything. I make no money doing this, of course. It's intentional. And hopefully I can keep doing that forever and forever and ever, ever and ever. But life, this is just not an easy realm, you know? Wherever we are, whatever it is not easy going. Crazy things have happened. Strange things that are, you know, they happen to lots of people. Some people suck. And they make terrible decisions. You think you know someone, maybe your whole life, maybe a family member or something, and then they just turn around and become something else. Really, everything in my life got turned upside down. And all the plans that I had sort of laid out for the future are now completely, I might as well have thrown them in the toilet. So, there's a lot of uncertainty. But in the meantime, we're still out here trying to teach one and reach one and turn the whole thing around, right? Even if it's by asking dumb questions, even if it's by looking at old houses like this bad boy. This is known as the George F. Knopf House, and as far as I can tell from this survey, not from things filed later in life, like maybe in the National Register of Historic Places, I'm sure there's more information available, but for this survey, really all they tell us is that this is a Queen Anne built in 1893, and it was demolished in 1979, which is the same year that this little bit of info was gathered. It's a 2.5 stories. Obviously, there's a third submerged story down there in the nether regions, lost in time to us all. And we're told it had mythological animal-headed brackets on the French porch like this. These look like the serpents that they're referring to. There's some Gothic windows, fine interior woodwork, ceramic tiles, cast brass door hardware, stuff like that. So they didn't even let this thing live for 100 years, and they tore it down. 100 years seems kind of like a long time, but you know what? It's not really, because I'm in a house that's like, 70 years old or something, built in the 50s, and it feels very modern. So, I don't know what we're doing here. I mean, they destroyed this the year this card and these photos were taken. So, does this house look like it needs to be destroyed and demolished? I mean, it looks like I can't see underneath it, of course. There's very little info, but it looks fine. So, what's going on, Bridgeport? Huh? Where's your historical society? Oh, there they go. We do get to see them. Yay. You know what? They're actually not really like serpents. They're more like, what's that flying cocker spaniel from Neverending Story? Falcor? Kind of like Falcor. Sleeping Falcor. Well, let's not wake the babes. Oh, I guess we do get to see inside. That's nice. All right. The old fireplace that we don't burn logs in, you know, with the old metal plate here. That's pretty cool. No wonder they destroyed it. You can't have that old world stuff around here. Now that's more like it. That must have what happened later. It was a different room. This is the one that we wanted to deface with burning logs. And just in case you wanted to see the shape of the photographer's head here, he took this shadowy image, which tells us nothing. The woodwork, man, look at that. It's just excellent. Very cool. Why are we destroying this house again? I get that right? We're destroying this house for what reason? The same year these pictures were taken. Can you imagine demolishing this house? A lot of nerve, you guys got a lot of frickin' nerve. What the hell went on in the 70s here? Here's a lovely picture of a house that should have been destroyed long ago. I mean, maybe not. Looks like people still kind of live there, so I'm sorry if I'm stepping on somebody's. But you know what I'm saying. I mean, look at it. Looks rather dilapidated by my standards, but who knows? Maybe a hurricane just happened. And my mom had a car like this. We called it the Doozer. So, a lot of doozers on this street. I'm not sure exactly what I'm supposed to be looking at here. Is it the neighborhood? Wait, it's my survey. I'm supposed to be telling you what we're looking at. Fuck. Take that line out of here, Jimmy. This is the Armstrong Mill Historic District, and these are just simply houses within said district. There's very little information given to us about this in this particular survey. We're told that these houses were demolished in 1978. So again, demolished just shortly after the time of this. It says the card was prepared in 1979. So the photographs might be... Okay, the photographs are from the 60s. Yeah, the 60s. So, you know, these were demolished shortly after that. Hopefully the people were not still in them when they were demolished. This here is the Bush Holly House. Bush-Holly. This one we are given extensive data about. It is built sometime in 1730 or 1732. It's hard to say. Unknown architect. Shocking. And it's owned by people named Gershom Lockwood, who sold it to Abraham Hayes for £6. Jesus Christ. I don't know what £6 is, but you can't buy a house for $6 anything. The Bush family remained in this property until 1835. Not that Bush family, but maybe related, because the Bushes do show up in the old, as one of the lesser families in the old Illuminati bloodline. Dr. David Isaacs Bush eventually sold it, and eventually it's owned by the Historical Society of the town of Greenwich. There's an original house that was added on to. This was used as a headquarters for General Putnam in the Revolutionary War. It was from this house that he took Miss Sally Bush to the dance the night before his famous ride. They also used to make salt works and flour milling here because it's right by the water. The flour mill was burnt down in 1889, and everyone was surprised. When George Jackson Smith owned the house, he was a town clerk. During the debate over the plans for the new town hall, he took the plans and papered one of the rooms in the house with them. That'll show them. By God, gentlemen, if we don't come to an agreement, I swear I'll take these papers and I'll wallpaper the hell out of my parlor with them. And he made good on his threat, too. It used to be called the Holly Inn. William Glackens, Alden Twachtman, Elmer Livingston, all sorts of artists I've never heard of resided in this house. And maybe that makes me uncultured. Willa Cather wrote some of her most exquisite writing in the original north bedroom. There's some controversial information about this. There's a magazine here called Greenwich Old and New, and it says in a caption that the house was built in 1685 by Captain Bush, the Dutch trader, and it's the oldest house not standing in the town. I don't know what that means. Then there's a gentleman named Randolph Mason from Stonington. Jesus. And he mentions a tradition that the house may have been built by a Dutch trader in 1685, which would also co-sign along with that prior statement. But he noted that the first Justus Bush, not justice like judge, but justice like Justus, the father of the man who bought the property, apparently never lived here and was always lived in New York, and was 11 years old in 1685. Far too young, surely, to build a house of this stature. Usually you're doing pillow forts and things of that nature, if you're anything like my childhood. Mr. Mason goes on to suggest the house might have been built by the town's first parson, not person, Eli Follett, whatever, Jones. Mr. Jones. This idea stems from the fact that Spencer Mead, in his Ye Historic of Greenwich, the best-known local history, mentions a sale to Jones of land lying by the river. An editor's note here that I was in Greenwich when this idea first appealed to members of the Historical Society and to me, and was disappointed to find it impossible. You know, these old historian books, they have things like, they don't have addresses, so they say things like, it's a highway between John Hobby's home lot and ye home lot of Mr. Jones's. Mr. Mead's home is also mentioned in this. This was 1672, when the town appointed a committee to put a value on the house, and lot Mr. Jones liveth upon. However, Mr. Jones no more liveth upon this house, as he sold it to the town, describing it as a ye home lot of Joseph Mead on ye northwest and John Hubby on ye southeast, butting to ye street southwest, and ye lot of Richard Bullard northeast, also ye house built by ye forced Mr. Jones upon ye said lot. I doubt he said that, but it is in quotation marks, so Mr. Jones did not own this Bush Holly house, is the conclusion that the Connecticut Antiquarian and Landmark Society came to, which finally we have solved one of the great mysteries of our time. Well done, gentlemen. Well, also the fact that Captain Justus Bush might not even have been a captain, and his Dutchness was a couple of generations back, so not a captain, not Dutch, but he did own the property, and he could have built the house if the architects feel it could date after 1738, whatever that means. This is a ridiculous report. And honestly, it doesn't really make sense. Sorry, Captain Bush, that they've pooped on your legacy so much, you non-captain, non-Dutch, non-homeowner. The published descriptions of this house recent years mention that on removing wallpaper from the southern wing, chalk inscriptions were found on a wooden wall. The inscriptions are somewhat faint and have been covered by glass. The date 1765 was very clear when the paper first came off, but like reappearing, disappearing ink, it is no longer legible. A writer, seeing only the picture, mentioned this wrong date. This has been perpetuated in another flyer since. One item in chalk mentions Sergeant M. Lockwood, probably referring to Sergeant Moses Lockwood. But a check with the records will show that Lockwood, who was very young in 1745, was a private in 1756, and not a sergeant until 1759, meaning this chalk drawing on the inside of a wall lied to us. Another faked sergeant. So far, things seem very uncertain in the land of Connecticut, and no one seems to agree on anything. Regardless, this is a very old home, hundreds of years, maybe built by a captain from Dutch trader land named Bush, maybe not, but hold up, there we are. Our same friends that just seem to find us everywhere. And one would think this would be a banjo without strings, but one would know better, wouldn't they? Look at these primitive fools with their rustic board game checkers. Nerds. And still, rather, holding up well for being like 300 years old. I mean, that last one we saw way better than this, and they demolished the fuck out of it. So, I don't know, man. Things don't make sense in the world of history. And it should be noted that I can tell, by the way that they sorted these files, that, there'll be 50 to 100 properties in between these that are no longer even on the survey. Like, they just didn't get included. The way they number them. So, who knows how much stuff has actually been destroyed. But, I mean, my guess would be, as far as my calculations are concerned, it's pretty accurate to say, fuckloads. Here we have a house that has no information on it whatsoever, so unless someone can identify one of these women, I'm afraid that we'll have to move on. No takers? No one's grandmother? No one? Okay. In that case, we find ourselves here at the Stephen Mather House on Stephen Mather Road. This is in Fairfield County, in the town of Darien, and there's a little bit of history here about the original Mathers dying and giving the property to their children, getting handed down over the years. Some modifications that were added that really, they removed the buttery and added a porch and things like this. But what's more important about this house, we are told, is the historical events connected with it. Reverend Dr. Moses Mather was for 60 years the pastor of the church, and his son, Dr. Deacon Joseph, for whom the house was built in 1778, and his wife, Hannah Bell, who was a descendant of Francis Bell, one of the earliest settlers of Stamford, Connecticut. This is an extremely remote from the Kings Highway and Long Island Sound home that was chosen in hope of avoiding the Tory raids during the Revolution. It was considered a safe repository for their silver and their valuables by the neighbors. They were hidden down the well and suspended by straps under the top of the highway, still standing in the homestead. But the house was discovered, and a band of Tories came, and they plundered the house, and they compelled Mrs. Mather at the point of a bayonet to prepare them a supper at the huge fireplace. "You make us supper or else, Mrs. Mathers. We are hungry men, and unpredictable. And we don't know how to cook." "Yes, that's exactly right, we don't. We don't know how to cook, do we?" "Yeah, so you'll make it for us, yes you will." They then ordered the deacon to accompany them to Long Island Sound to prevent his giving the alarm to the community until they were a safe distance away, leaving behind Mrs. Mather, who then probably gave the alarm. Fuck, we didn't think of that, did we? Damn it! Those Tories are incompetent and hungry. This, of course, led to the deacon fighting as a soldier in the Revolution on a number of occasions, following the custom of, returning to his farm between campaigns. He enlisted as a sergeant in the Coast Guard and still somehow managed to farm during the off-season. Oddly, there's a man named Stephen Ting Mather, the founder and first director of the National Park Service, which actually conducts these surveys, still today is the sole owner. He used the house as his summer residence from 1907 until 1930. His grandchildren are the sixth generation of family to have lived in the house, which was declared a National Historic Landmark in 1964. Wow! So the owner of the guy that does these surveys and the founder owns this place, and always has. I don't know what to think of that. Yes, history really is written by the winners, and the houses are also lived in by the winners. It should be noted that the sources of information in this are unpublished leaflets, and they're based on Mather family records. So the whole thing could be a friggin' lie. Made up by these Matherfuckers. And they also named the street after them, so I mean, you tell me what's going on here, dude. What, you guys get your own street name, dude? And what happened to the neighbor Silver, I want to know? You know what? I bet Miss Mather made that whole story up. Those Tories would never force her to make them dinner. That's not their style. They would have gotten takeout. And she probably just made it up so she could keep the silver. Yeah, that's my conspiracy of the day. That concludes this investigation. I have no reason to doubt the Mathers, for the record. I'm just being cheeky. The other interesting things about this house are, well, it's a 50-acre property, so that's pretty cool. And there's brick out in the patio and in the garden, we're told. And there's Mrs. Mathers there, just down the hall. And we've got our usual suspects here, and you can't get, you can't tell me, there's something up with these. I mean, they're not just log carriers. There's something going on here. There's Mrs. Mathers and her little ghoulish offspring. And, a very nice little old home here, surviving here in New England. Very quaint, and just look at those hinges. They must be original. Hence the extremely weird photograph of them. This is the David Ogden House in Fairfield, also in Fairfield County. It can be both. We are told this was built by one of the Ogdens about 1715 or 20, possibly as early as 1710. We are told here, between Fairfield and Greenfield Hills, stands the Ogden House, exemplifying even today the true splendor of an unspoiled colonial dwelling. The merit of the house consists almost entirely in the fact that it is almost completely in its original condition, very little reconstruction being necessary. They think the north wing was added about 1750, and the rest is absolutely original. These shingles, and they're original? That is impressive. Couple 100-year-old wood work. That's pretty impressive. And the look at the massive elm tree just behind it really adds a lot to the framing of the picture. David Ogden had 3 sons who served in the Revolutionary War from this house. Ellen Ogden was a descendant who acquired much of the property, was married to Ebenezer Silliman. Ebenezer Silliman, a sea captain, of course. But unlike his name, he was very serious, and he had no children and lived a very retired life with much exactness and precision. Ellen Ogden Silliman is reputed to have been so retiring as to take an out-of-the-way river path rather than the highway just to avoid her neighbors. Or maybe they never existed. True story. One of those. Whether it's the one I completely made up or the one that's backed in historical anecdotes. I mean, I don't know. You choose. As long as you have two options, I'm good with it. I won't be offended if you go with the original story. And have a doorknob. Again, must be original due to the extreme. And wow, this is really actually excellent photography for the time. I mean, that's just a fantastically appealing, a very pleasing picture for some reason. That just really beautiful weathering on that wood. Wow, that was even better. These photographers are really nailing it. I mean, I'm not being sarcastic. That is a really nice picture, especially for that era. Now that hat, on the other hand, what the fuck is going on there? It's barely on their head. And what is this, robot arm? Something weird about that picture. Like, what is she wearing and holding? I mean, if your daughter, if your fledgling art student made that, then maybe. Also, of note, this strange chessboard. Yeah, it's almost the pieces are almost too big for the board. In any case, goodbye, silly hat lady. Wow. Not to be outdone, we have that abomination of a hat. This guy's like, and this guy needed a hat. Well, weak hat game aside, this property is probably pretty. Oh, and there we have it. And the penny drops. The old hidden hand man. I see what's going on there, Mr. Ogden. And, Mr. Ogden, I might have known. You there. Don't come limping in here with that pathetic, barely oversized hat. We want monstrosities, or nothing. Yeah, someone's an art student. Here we have the world's first rocket ship. This is NASA's beginning project. Would you buy that? No? Okay. Well, good, because it was a lie. I was just testing you. This imitation rocket isn't anything of the sort. It's actually a windmill owned by Frederick Bronson. It's unique because it survived, and it's also maintaining its integrity. The octagonal plan, and the wind vane, and the machinery, and there's a large wooden water tank, and an underground cistern. An underground cistern? I knew it! Pretty amazing, though, that it survived this long. Got the little fish scale shingles here, looking like they've been, weather beaten. What do you expect? 100 years. 1893 is when they say it was initially constructed, and I have no reason to doubt that information. Kind of hard to tell what's going on with these pictures. They're a little too close up. Yeah, we get the point. Whole Sherwood House. And it is endowed plentifully. It's on Mill Hill. This is part of the common land. It was voted that Mill Hill remain common Portions were soon granted to colonists, so that didn't last very long. Thomas Sherwood received a large grant from the king, the north of which to build a mill. And now many modern houses stand here, and the Sherwood names are few. But this is a 2.5 story, due to the half basement. Not very elaborate, but very well balanced. And the present owner is a widow, still in the Sherwood family. It's never been out of the family. Arthur Sherwood, the great-great-grandfather, Benjamin Sherwood, owned the entire circuit of Mill Hill, and he has a house just outside of the cemetery. It's not very old, it's not very elaborate, but still, it's a balanced old house, and we're very fond of it. This one here is Captain Ward Bulkley's house. A lot of captains going on around there. You didn't take much. She said, "Are you a captain?" "I'm a captain too." "Well, me too then." "Well, we're all captains." Many times in restaurants, it was not uncommon for reservations to be made for 3 or 4 captains at the time. Anyway, 2.5 stories, and it's built in 1834, Southwark Historic District. And that's all I'm told about this bad boy, other than they misuse their fireplaces dreadfully. And whoa, first real banger. This is the Lockwood Matthews house. It was built for LeGrand Lockwood, who died in 1872. The architect is someone named Detlef Linneau. And there are very few drawings and very little information about it. The grounds, this is Elm Park, which is on the Long Island Sound. It's about halfway between the villages of Norwalk and Norwalk, if I'm saying that. I'm sure there's some colloquialism. It's like Norwalk. And South Norwalk, 3/4 of a mile from each. It's like a 25-acre property, and really it is an old world lovely thing. It's about 2 acres worth of gardens, bunch of fruit trees, there's a grapery, there's a hothouse for plants, and all these buildings are constructed in the most perfect manner. There is a cellar underneath the entire building, and a large pile of cow dung next to the parlor. Oh, there it is. There's a summer kitchen on the outside. The whole floor, marvelous property, by every sense of the word. Looks like they're doing some renovations on it here, tearing all the whole front was covered with vines. An interesting little iconography there. So Mr. Lockwood, for whom the house was built, was a native son. His family was here since the beginning. He was head of one of Wall Street's best-known brokerages, of course. So he made a fortune in stocks and government bonds during the Civil War, and this was a $1 million mansion even back then. He was active in the development of the early car lines. He was on the board of several railroad companies and the steamship company. And the tracks of the Danbury Norwalk Railroad, of which he was vice president, ran directly to the east of his property. Shocking. He floated a $2 million bond for New York, New Haven, and Hartford line at a crucial moment of its history. Basically, he was one of a new breed of men who emerged in this period, the Wall Street tycoon and railroad man. He was like the OG Baron. First millionaire in Norwalk, and not quite in the same category as Vanderbilt, but he had certain qualities, allegedly, which the elder man lacked. He was personally charming, he was well-liked, he was generous, he was public-spirited, he had a reputation of being a man of his word. In other words, gentlemen, he was a gentleman. Unlike Jay Cooke, the famous financier of the Civil War to whom he was distantly related, Lockwood had enjoyed the benefits of a good education, extensive travel, cultivated the role of a lover, and patron of the arts and sciences. And women. Both as Norwalk's first millionaire and as a man of taste. He felt an obligation, architecturally speaking, towards the town of his birth. Quite understandably, the house Lineur designed for him was no picturesque cottage retreat. It was a country mansion, destined to be the showplace of the community. $2 million, the New York Times claims he was going to spend on this home. What an incredible fireplace. Holy shite. More of that, please. I'll take all you got. Thank God they used it properly, didn't burn wood in it. There is a mistaken attribution of note to the design of the great mansions abroad, is easily explained by the New York Times article in 1867. It says one of these, being erected, or res-erected, will cost nearly $2 million. When completed, will stand with scarcely a rival in the U.S. The designs were furnished by an eminent European architect, who has planned many of the palatial residences out beyond the Great Pond. A very vague reference to some European architect, eh? Doesn't seem like it has much journalistic integrity. They say that Lockwood traveled far and wide searching materials for it. Egyptian, Florentine marble, carved to order in Italy, the rarest and best imported woods, huge mantles, all brought from Europe, 19 bedrooms on the second floor alone, 14 bathrooms, 12 water closets, which I thought was a bathroom until this moment, private theater in the attic, and a bowling alley in the basement. Capacity of the wine cellar, which is the entire bottom floor, leads me to believe he is definitely not a Puritan. Private spring, so had its own water supply, 23 bells connecting with all the principal rooms. Ridiculous. A doorbell for every room? What if I'm not in my room? There was a burglar alarm connected to every window and door on the first 2 floors, and a burglar-proof vault for silver. Burglar alarm? We can go on and on and on and on about this, but I have to run. So I'll see you in a second. I'm back. Although due to the power of editing, it's like I never left. Documents here are many, and they are rather flowery. They say things like, here we can still see the dark oak, walnut, and Brazilwood wainscoting, the huge mantels and sideboards, inconceivably ponderous monuments to stability. In sum, the interiors of the Lockwood Mansion are probably the finest and the best preserved of their kind in the United States. Even the bathroom fixtures are interesting. Each washstand made of marble with its own drinking fountain, in addition to hot and cold running water. Remarkable for the early 1900s. Don't forget the 2 billiard rooms, 45 feet in length. The polygonal pantry is my favorite part. Oh, really? What about you, Jenkins? I prefer the dramatic sweep of the staircase, unparalleled in American domestic architecture, Markery side. This is just an absolutely incredible, exception to that wall, incredible mansion. I mean, this place is over the top. Over the top. You know, black and white, it's hard to picture it. It might be a little more gaudy and ugly in real life. Maybe if it's painted funny. I could see how this could be made to be very tacky. But the black and white gives it a sort of a balance. You just assume everything is carved from wood and these neutral tones. And when looked at through that, it is just mind-blowingly beautiful. And this is part of the problem why, hey, there's the guy's head again. This is when selfies first started. When we think of mastery as far as like talent and skills, it almost comes with the, to my Brian, where you do something and it's simply every detail is looked at. Every detail or creation doesn't appeal to you. When you are made aware that all the details have been considered and some effort has been made to involve them in the process, then that's when you reach a point where, I mean, I like it, but it is mastery. And I would feel like this would change you. Whether that's walking through this, standards are so elevated all the time, you get used to this palatial hallway. And maybe some people live like this, I don't know. You may even develop some sort of air of superiority. Or maybe not. Maybe you actually set your standards higher and it elevates you up, making you more powerful in your worldview. Nearly everything in your life that you do have, while you might have lost things, everything you do have those, probably because of something you did, or something you thought about, something you went out and bought, something you actively made moves to do. Maybe. In this way, we kind of control our own destiny. In this way, we seems to me create our own world in a way. It's hard to see things you're not looking for. Having such a lofty expectation, then maybe it's easy for you to maintain generational wealth, give confidence, maybe to a fault even. And I'm just musing, but in any case, this place was great for Mr. Lockwood until September 24th, 1869, Black Friday. But the bottom dropped out of the market, and Lockwood was ruined. But Monday morning, he was back in Wall Street. The first thing he did was turn over his house to his creditors. He was able to regain title to Elm Park, for which he then mortgaged heavily to the Lakeshore Railroad, of which he was very conveniently the treasurer. But he never really got over Black Friday, legend says, and he died of pneumonia. 2 months later, the New York Stock Exchange actually closed for the day of his funeral. So a real who's who of who. This land was put up for sale, advertised as the perfect home for a gentleman of taste, culture, and fortune, who is able to avail himself of the singular opportunity to obtain a princely mansion at the cost of merely a moderate establishment. The most elegant and perfect mansion in America, according to the lengthy advertisement. But this was 1873, and the house remained on the market for 3 years before it found a buyer. Carbonated beverage king Charles Matthews, so a different type of racketeer, who purchased it for a fraction of its original cost, until 1939 when it was leased to the city of Norwalk, and finally purchased for park and conversion. The mansion has been threatened recently, according to this writing in the 70s, by the Connecticut Thruway. There was joint action of the Society for the Preservation of the Antiquities of Norwalk and the former mayor, colluded and was able to reroute and avert demolition. And at the time, plans are under consideration for conversion of the building to a city hall. Whether or not this has happened is not stated in this survey. Okay, this one. And let's just stop and look at the stars on the ceiling. And I want to just pontificate slightly about this type of amazing home and the effect it must have on you. Same little star fort type shape here. Very old world looking. And there's something to be said about this type of home decor. This must be the doorbell of the 20 with the different rooms. I love this steampunk little style. Like, that's such a fantastic blend of aesthetics and functionality and hardy construction. Just well made. Just something to that era that's just outstanding from a design point of view. Great news is I think I finally learned the difference between a water closet and a bathroom. I meant the other way around. It's so literal. Imagine strolling out into this hallway. This is your home, and you grew up here or whatever, and you know, you got your dog laying here or whatever, and you come out here and sit down and get your coffee or whatever it is you do. And this is just the entry hall. This sort of pulling upwards, everything vaulted, everything lifted, everything glorious. Every attention to detail taken into consideration. The symbolism, the sort of energy pattern. Well, with the exception of that, I suppose. And these are interesting. Furnaces in the archway. Makes me wonder. In any case, something like this. I don't know if you were to try to embellish this how you could. Like, every detail is spoken for in a classy way, not overkill. Everything tied together. The columns, the movement here, the columns, the little toroidal tops. All of it is just so exquisite. And it just speaks to me of a people that's not us. Let me explain what I mean by, I don't mean not human. I don't mean not biologically different than us, but a people who lived in a time when, first of all, you had the time and the ability to make something like this. It speaks to an era where people were really, truly proud of their craft and really, truly interested in what they did until they became masters at it over time. They had the time, they were granted the time and the ability to work for the sake of producing beauty and functionality as the same thing. Not people who were ripping each other off. Not people who are taking cheap shortcuts on material. Not people who are pressed for time and sacrificing quality for the dollar bill. It just speaks to a different era in mentality, in art, in culture, and it truly does seem as if it were a different time period. It's just incredible. I mean, the attention to this alone. I know I'm looking at a mansion here, but this mansion is not alone. There are examples of this in much smaller homes, and really, by the design of the water closet alone, if that's what you call it, this looks crude and primitive compared to even the door frame, leading me to believe that this was added in later, leading me to believe that perhaps houses like this weren't even lived in. They were for other purposes. But perhaps not. Perhaps just the leaders and the affluent of the past culture lived here, the past society. I don't know. I'm just saying what it looks like, okay? Maybe those people didn't have to ever excrete waste. I mean, look at the intricacies here and the repeating patterns here just in the gate outside. This curved, very toroidal shape, the top, see it? And then indicating current, perhaps going down, up just like magnetism. and this looking like some sort of like electric field, electricity and water bubbling up through the columns. And they show you this everywhere. It's like they've embedded the clues to the tech inside the art, and we just don't know how to look for it. The battery's here. Not in real life, of course, carved from wood, but showing you how it works, leaving behind hints, as if they knew, as if it was a celebration of everything they did, was to be celebrated. The to be praised. And this here looks to me, and again, I am speaking simply on visuals, okay? I don't pretend to have an understanding of how this could work, but it seems to me this here, this opening, would be for a battery, a cell of some sort, and this top opening being the place where you have access to remove it, just like a battery would. It seems weird to leave this blank with all this ornamentation around it. It seems like something's missing here.
Something is missing.
Why? These shapes, these stars, you see here, you see everywhere. You see it here on the door, here on the ceiling, here on the floor, along with the Swiss cross. The same symbolism everywhere. And it just makes you wonder if it's a hint, if it's a clue. Because if not, why do it? Why take the effort to make these little imitations of larger things? Because it's literally a celebration, or you're leaving clues as to how it works. These empty shields, these empty spaces. Just a thought. Strikingly beautiful house. This is the Benjamin Pomeroy Carriage House, built in 1868, designed by Lambert and Bunnell again. Well, this is the Moses Bulkley House. Same architect, and very stylistic details, highly ornate, carved wooden trim. The builders were the Northrop brothers. Add that one to the list. So I see we're just going to continue the tradition of making builders as brothers. Northrop brothers, whatever. Mr. Moses Bulkley was a prosperous sea captain. Seems to be a lot of those here. And he was involved in the commerce of the Mill River Harbor. Though his son was without a profession, he was a generous patron of the arts and literature. That's not suspicious at all. This here, very Parthenon-looking thing, is the Captain William Webb Wakeman House. William Webb Wakeman, Triple W. Henceforth, we'll call him old Captain Trip Dub. Captain Trip Dub was born in 1799, the son of Jacob Wakeman, an eminent citizen of the community, who ran a general store and operated a line of boats out of Mill River Harbor. He was also, on a side note, one of the first directors of the Bridgeport Bank in 1807. Of course, I wondered how you get this type of home, and I can't just be a manager of a store. This is some elite stuff. He was also actively involved in the Turnpike Company, which laid the first major throughway between New York City and New Haven. And he also was a principal proprietor of a large tract of firelands in Ohio's Western Reserve, which became the village of Wakeman. Untold millions by today's standards. As a young man, Captain Trip Dub worked with his father, and by the mid-century he was involved in the East Indian and China trade under the firm name of Wakeman, Demon & Co. He built a line of steamships and owned a line of steamships, and he was commissioned by the federal government during the Civil War to transport troops and equipment. Heavy trade between New York and Havana helped Captain Trip Dub build his wealth, and he was also an original trustee of the Southport Savings Banks and an incorporator of Oak Lawn Cemetery, which was able to allow him to afford this, which was photographed here in 1966. And here you can see almost the blooming movement, again, up these fluted columns of the toroidal movement, like the jellyfish as it pulses. And of course we know that this energy goes in. Again, this is just a celebration of it stylistically. I'm not saying it's functional, but it is interesting how this all keeps turning back up over and 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 over. And I like the wallpaper. Again, these houses could be painted very gaudy and ugly, but they happen to have these black and white photos. Everything's very muted. It looks very nice. And that's not exactly the type of picture I expected to see inside of a wealthy American's home. Interesting little fireplace doohickeys, aren't they? This is not the same property, though it may fool you at first, if you're as stupid as I am. This is the Oliver H. Perry house. Now, Mr. Oliver H. Perry was born in 1815, the son of Walter Perry. He was educated at Yale at the age of 15. He was admitted to the bar at age 26. Didn't practice law, however, but used his legal expertise to flex when it came to business and financial matters. He held many government positions at the state level. Connecticut General Assembly in 1847 to 49, 1853, 1857, 1860, 1864. He was elected Secretary of State in 1854 to Connecticut and Speaker of the House for 2 years. He was an active member of the Committee for the Design and the Construction of the new public school building. Also owner of Strange Wallpaper. What is this, like a strange angel creature, like giving something to someone while someone sits nearby? I don't know. In any case, despite his flair for a rather flowery ceiling medallions. He was also one of the original trustees of the Oak Lawn Cemetery Association and was involved in the plan and building of the Congregational Church in 1875. And the entire property is just gorgeous, from the columns. And here is a much better example, even, or closer, I should say, of this same toroidal movement. And in fact, this entire piece here looks as if it's a cross-section of a torus. I mean, it looks like it's even winding up here, like it's just being wound up. Pretty incredible. Either that, or it's a weird alien. And these are his eyes, and this is his teeth with this severe underbite. Not much in the way of information. It is indeed a 2.5-story home featuring basement, as usual, to be expected times like these. This one looking a bit more rustic, and with a fireplace that's been rudely abused. For shame. And here we have the Henry Perry house. It's different. A different Perry. This sumbitch right there. 2.5-story, of course. And it was built in 1832. Henry Perry's will states that he purchased it for $550 and willed it to his wife for her life and then to his brothers upon her death. Due to this clause, there was some form of infighting afterwards regarding the true nature of the property's owner, but I won't get into all that here. It's rather dry and, well, just not that interesting. But a preponderance of Perry Greek Revival-style temples is what it appears to me to be here in this part of Connecticut. And this here, again, is the Charles Perry home. How many friggin' Perrys are they? This here is also erected in 1822, so even earlier. He was 26 years old and unmarried when he acquired the land. It is improbable that he would have built a residence of these proportions at the age of 26, but then they don't offer any other, say it's no information available. Basically, they're saying, don't believe this lie. It talks about some modifications done to it. Mr. Perry was, of course, a wealthy sea captain and a prominent figure within Southport's community. Here we are again with another stunning Greek revival structure, we're told. Oh, wait. Never mind. This is the same house. This is the Charles Perry house. Yeah, it is unlikely that this person would build something like this at age 26. This is Captain Walter Thorpe house. Apparently paid to be a captain back in. Captains everywhere. Captain Thorpe here. Well, this is considered to be modest with a attenuated classical details. Pay no attention to those fluted Doric columns, of course. Very different, okay? We're given only one picture of this one, and we are told it was constructed in 1820. 1820. God, this house has been around for 200 friggin' years. At least 200 years. These surveys are giving us much practical information, but nothing really too interesting. They'll tell you the dimensions, and they'll tell you the height, and I'm sparing you all those details. Just look it up yourself if you're that curious. This house was built in 1767, the William Bulkley House was, and is one of the few pre-revolution houses in Southport. It was burned and ravaged by Tory loyalists, we're told. Only 11 houses in the region survived the burning. The Bulkleys are a reputed family in the area. Still to this day, at least as far as 1967 was concerned when this was written. He was an original prosperous landowner, was Mr. William Bulkley. He also owned a mercantile store opposite his residence on Harbor Road. Again, not else much told about this house other than its age, hurdy-gurdy. And we've come to the point where reality has caved in upon us. Good God, who built this sumbitch? Well, of course, let me guess, Lambert and Hummel? Lambert and Bunnell, I was so close! Was organized in 1874. It took 1 year to build and $30,000. The Chronicle, here you got an article here, the Chronicle, May 23rd, 1874. The church has started from its foundation Tuesday of this week and seemed to move with the greatest of ease. Mr. Gold, the veteran builder mover, was in charge of the job. Yet, however, here, June 4th, 2 weeks later, they say the architects signed a final contract for the design. These two, Henry Lambert and Rufus Bunnell, who built pretty much every house we've seen today, they were the only architects practicing in the Bridgeport area. Here it says it has been decided to build the new church on the old site, whatever that means. And just look at this bad boy. Looking very, very out of place in this era. Out of place indeed. It's your old spiky sconces, you know what that means. Talked about that before. You have your same little magnetron shape here. The same symbolism everywhere you go. And here we have an even more fairy-looking magic Saruman wizard castle. The Trinity Church. Like in Trailer Park Boys? Just like in Trailer Park Boys, Jimmy. You know what I'm saying? Trinity Church, know what I'm saying? Designed by Albert C. Nash, know what I'm saying? Erected in 1854, know what I'm saying? Because of the, know what I'm saying, building's near total, know what I'm saying, destruction by wind, know what I'm saying? Let me start over. Trinity Church, know what I'm saying, was designed by Albert C. Nash and erected during the years 1854, 1856. However, 6 years later, the church was completely destroyed by wind during a tornado, which they should have actually led with. Trinity is an excellent example of Gothic Revival church architecture. Named after Ricky's daughter in the popular television series Trailer Park Boys, which came out nearly 100 years later, a remarkable example of foresight. This church was built by Albert C. Nash, who was born in 1826. He began his architectural practice in 1854, the same year this was constructed, meaning this is the first thing he constructed, which is totally reasonable to assume. He's done many churches, has Nash, the Church of Atonement, Church of the Advent, Central Christian and Unitarian churches, the Baptist and Congregational churches on Walnut Hill, and the Presbyterian Church in Clifton, Ohio. I, however, have my doubts. Here's a really very amusing anecdote written by the Inland Architect, which says, Mr. Nash had a manner peculiar to himself, for he had always made the preliminary sketches on paper that had been ruled by light blue lines into quarter-inch squares, and this paper seldom saw the T-square or the triangle. That's some sort of a sick burn. Nash was also president of the Cincinnati AIA from 1873 to 1876, which is a highly... Fellow colleagues wrote in 1890, Mr. Nash was the friend of the young architect, and more than one young man just starting on his professional career owes much to Mr. Nash because of his timely advice and encouragement, and even of that of a more substantial commodity known as a job. He was a gentleman. He was a scholar. He was polite and warm-hearted. He was always looking to represent his brethren at any public gathering. The building committee consisted of Moses Bulkley, William Bulkley, and 3 others. Interesting letter here from Mr. Nash. These letters go back and forth to call attention to this very basement. The letter talks about them wanting to have their meeting room to be above ground, the lecture room, and they want to clear away the earth from half of the main building. And the argument that's being brought up by the committee against this is saying it'll impair the look and style of the building. And Mr. Nash, the architect, after convincing him of this, says, I am happy to learn you've abandoned the basement, where there can be no objection to lowering the floor as you proposed, although it will not add to the appearance externally, it will help the internal arrangement. In regard to the basement, partly of brick and partly of stone, for many reasons this would be objectionable. The variety of material in the building would give the church the appearance of having been built by donations of materials and labors instead of money. And I know the Southport people, this would not suit them. You get that? He's saying to be sure the brick might be painted, but it will never endure and never look like stone. Stone might be used, and then comes the spoiling of a beautiful piece of ground. The church out of ground so much more at one end than the other would not look trim, and the work would appear very much out of level. And certainly nothing can be neater than a nicely graded lot. Than the icy steps for winter evening meetings, and the host of objections to the basement, I should most assuredly hold up both hands for the lecture room in the rear, for convenience and looks. So here's the architect, really not wanting them to do any excavations in the building, and talking about, nothing. As we all know, certainly nothing could be neater than a nicely graded lot. Meanwhile, every house in this entire era is a completely jacked up grade on their lot. So it's interesting so much that they're causing so much attention to this. 6 years later, a tornado came through and blew the steeple down. Through the roof! This destruction was so complete, the edifice had to be virtually rebuilt. Crushing the building so badly, a more complete wreck could not be portrayed, said Reverend Edmund Gilbert. Luckily, the organ was unharmed, as was the altar and the stained glass. Within a week, they rebuilt it. This land of supermen, this land of powerful builder-shakers. They cleared the ruins, made an examine of the foundation and the floor. After this examination, they came to the conclusion that the remaining portion of the tower and the foundation were sufficient to build upon again. Almost seems like that's what happened the first time. But that's just reckless speculation. Still, though, a remarkably beautiful building with much attention to detail, as we've seen time after time after time, and it's basically become the trademark of this here New England style, with the exception of whatever the fuck's going on there. Everything else looks lovely, and of course, as if we couldn't end it on a better note than the eagle, the spread eagle. This looks exactly like the phoenix of the old world. It's not an American symbol, not initially anyway. And so on that note, I will see you soon.